I'm Jason Chaffetz in for Laura Ingraham, and this is a special edition of the Ingraham Angle. To a Fox News alert, President Biden is set to speak at 7:45 p.m. Eastern on the Supreme Court's immunity ruling.
President of the United States.
The presidency is the most powerful office in the world. It's an office that not only tests your judgment, perhaps even more importantly, it's an office that can test your character. Because you not only face moments when you need the courage to exercise the full power of the presidency, you also face moments where you need the wisdom to respect the limits of the power of the office of the presidency. This nation was founded on the principle that there are no kings in America. Each of us is equal before the law. No one is above the law, not even the President of the United States. With today's Supreme Court decision on presidential immunity, that fundamentally changed. For all practical purposes, today's decision almost certainly means that there are virtually no limits on what a president can do. This is a fundamentally new principle, and it's a dangerous precedent, because the power of the office will no longer be constrained by the law, even including the Supreme Court of the United States. The only limits will be self-imposed by the president alone. This decision today has continued the court's attack in recent years on a wide range of long-established legal principles in our nation, from gutting voting rights and civil rights, to taking away a woman's right to choose, to today's decision that undermines the rule of law of this nation. Nearly 4 years ago, my predecessor sent a violent mob to the U.S. Capitol to stop the peaceful transfer of power. We all saw it with our own eyes. We sat there and watched it happen that day. Attack on the police, the ransacking at the Capitol, a mob literally hunting down the House Speaker, Nancy Pelosi, gallows erected to hang the Vice President, Mike Pence. I think it's fair to say it's one of the darkest days in the history of America. Now the man who sent that mob to the U.S. Capitol is facing potential criminal conviction for what happened that day. And the American people deserve to have an answer in the courts before the upcoming election. The public has a right to know the answer about what happened on January 6th before they are asked to vote again this year. Now, because of today's decision, that is highly, highly unlikely. It's a terrible disservice to the people of this nation. So now the American people will have to do what the courts should have been willing to do, but will not. The American people have to render a judgment about Donald Trump's behavior. The American people must decide whether Donald Trump's assault on our democracy on January 6th makes him unfit for public office in the highest office in the land. The American people must decide if Trump's embrace of violence to preserve his power is acceptable. Perhaps most importantly, the American people must decide if they want to entrust the president once again, the presidency, to Donald Trump, now knowing he'll be even more emboldened to do whatever he pleases whenever he wants to do it. You know, at the outset of our nation, it was the character of George Washington, our first president, to define the presidency. He believed power was limited, not absolute, and that power always resides with the people, always. Now, over 200 years later, with today's Supreme Court decision, once again, it will depend on the character of the men and women who hold that presidency that are going to define the limits of the power of the presidency, because the law will no longer do it. I know I will respect the limits of the presidential powers I have for 3.5 years, but any president, including Donald Trump, will now be free to ignore the law. I concur with Justice Sotomayor's dissent today. Here's what she said. She said, in every use of official power, the president is now a king above the law. With fear for our democracy, I dissent. End of quote. So should the American people dissent. I dissent. May God bless you all, and may God help preserve our democracy. Thank you. And may God protect our troops.
Why are you the best Democrat to beat Trump?
What makes you so confident you should be the president?
All right, we want to bring in Victor Davis Hanson now, senior fellow at the Hoover Institution, one of the smartest people on the planet. Victor, you heard this. What's your take on what the president did there from the White House?
Well, it was pretty rich, because this case would have never got to the Supreme Court had his own Department of Justice not appointed a special counsel that had a history of bias and went after the leading presidential opposition candidate to the president. And it wouldn't have come to the Supreme Court had Fani Willis not met with a White House counsel to coordinate a defense strategy in Georgia, prosecution strategy in Georgia. And it wouldn't have happened if the third highest ranking federal attorney in Merrick Garland's DOJ had not suddenly appeared at Alvin Bragg's prosecution. And so this was in response to the weaponization of the DOJ by none other than Joe Biden. Second, it's very ironic, Jason, because you see the special counsel, Robert Hur, said that Joe Biden himself, while he was president, faced criminal liability. He had classified files, which is a felony to be in his possession. He didn't notify anybody that he had them until he selected the special counsel to go after Donald Trump. And then he had a speechwriter that had no security clearance that admittedly was looking at those files in the presence of Joe Biden. The only reason he wasn't prosecuted was Robert Hur determined that he was too enfeebled and would win the sympathy of a jury. And, you know, finally, they have been going after the Supreme Court. Chuck Schumer went out to the doors of the Supreme Court and called out by name Justice Gorsuch and Kavanaugh and said, "You're going to reap the whirlwind. You don't know what's going to hit you." And then when protesters a year later started showing up, including a potential assassin, at the homes of the justices, Merrick Garland didn't enforce the law, which was a felony to do that for political purposes to influence the Supreme Court decision. So this was very tragic what Joe Biden just did. It was ironic, it was wrong, and it was highly partisan, and it's dangerous.
I think I would agree with all of that. It is tragic because we need a Supreme Court with its independence, and the Democrats are doing everything they can to make them dependent on whatever the political whim of the party in power is, and it's just disgusting. But Democrats have run out of things to run it. They can't run on the economy. They can't run on the border. They can't run on the protecting us overseas and all these wars that are going on. The mental and physical demise of Joe Biden is on display. So they're going to pick, I guess, the Supreme Court. But a 6-3 ruling in this particular case is pretty convincing, 6-3.
Yeah, well, especially when you've seen what they've done to Donald Trump and what they'll do to him again when he's probably going to be elected. And again, the irony is that Joe Biden violated his oath of office when he destroyed the southern border and allowed 10 million people illegally to enter the United States. There's a lot of people who felt that that was a violation of the oath of office. As I said earlier, he broke the law when he had in his possession, as president, classified file.
Victor Davis Hanson, thanks so much for joining us.